This is the Lutheran Education Podcast, a bi-weekly podcast where we explore issues, trends, and events surrounding Christian education with your hosts, Richard Schumacher, Senior Director of Operations at LSCM, and Dr. Tracy Salgado, Director of Special Education at LSCM.
Welcome to the Lutheran Education Podcast, brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries. I am your host. I'm Senior Director of Operations for LSCM. My name is Richard Schumacher, and we are pleased to bring back to the podcast again Dr. Drew Gerdes. He is the Assistant Professor of Education, the Doctor of Undergraduate Early Childhood Education, and the Director of Student Teaching at Concordia University, Nebraska. And I'm guessing probably two or three other things that isn't in the signature line, but mutually agreed upon in terms. Yeah. Drew, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Rich. Thanks for being here. And you are certainly correct. There's always a few extra things that we do in our ministries, but God has given us many gifts and talents. And whenever we can serve Him, that's a great thing to do.
It absolutely is. And so before we get started with the content, which I'm really excited about, again, talking about Anxious Generation and this new twist that you've got on it, just tell us what's happening at Concordia, Nebraska. What's the good word from Seward these days?
Well, I learn a little bit more about Nebraska every day. This is my third year living in Nebraska, being at Concordia, and Nebraska is known for being the place of the good life. And I believe that that is certainly true. Concordia, Nebraska is doing amazing things in education, serving our church at large. Our church worker enrollment continues to grow. We have another large group of freshmen that could be teacher ed, pre-sem, DCE, director of parish music. So I think we have almost 100 brand new church work students. And then combined with the students who have already enrolled or have been enrolled, we probably have 375 just church work students. We had a luncheon celebrating our church work vocation just earlier this week, and seeing the excitement for students to get out there and complete their degree and join in ministry was certainly a delight. Throughout our graduate program, we also have a number of different opportunities that are available for people who want to expand their knowledge, maybe get a master's degree. But we also have experiences for people who just maybe want to take a few classes or get a certificate. So if any listeners out there are looking at graduate degrees, I certainly encourage them to take a look at Concordia, Nebraska.
And Nebraska's programs are outstanding. LSCM is blessed to have several Nebraska graduates amongst our teaching staff. And so we are very, very blessed by the work that you and your colleagues there at Seward are doing and have been doing for a very long time. So keep that up, and we'll definitely keep in prayers all of those students who are going into the various church work vocations, that God would bless their time on campus, would give them strength and allow them to be able to, again, see the benefits that come from serving God in serving His children, especially in our schools.
Amen. Amen.
All right. So one of the things that our schools are facing are a lot of students who have heightened levels of anxiety for many reasons. And last year when we had you on the podcast, you were able to take us through Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. And a lot's been talked about that. And, since then there's been, a lot of, folks who've come out and said, yep, this is exactly where we're at and what we need to do. And of course, others who have come out and said, nope, this guy is way off base. He's just beating up smartphones. He's oversimplifying the whole process, and the science is questionable, all those sorts of things, whatnot. So now that it's been a year since we've talked, and about a year and a half since the book has come out, Drew, where are you at in terms of, has your position, has your stance changed on that? Or even just for somebody who is saying, what is this anxious generation and who is Dr. Jonathan Haidt? So kind of set the table for us a little bit about what Haidt's basic argument is, what his position is on this, and where you stand, how you see it kind of just in general affecting our kids in our schools.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Rich. I still significantly support the work that Jonathan Haidt did in his book with the Anxious Generation. You're right. It came out probably about a year and a half ago. I've actually read it about three and a half times. I just picked up the book the other day and realized that my bookmark is not at the end. So that means I have got some work to do to continue reading that. And he wrote the book really from the lens of working with adolescents, kind of those junior high school students, and the concern of screen time and what that really means for them as they are in school, but also as they enter into adulthood. And then my take has really brought in the early childhood lens and a lot of brain development and what that means for our youngest learners. Jonathan Haidt also in the book talked about the significant change that we've seen in the last few decades from a play-based childhood to a screen-based childhood. And I think no matter where you are in the country or in the world, you'll probably see kids who have some type of screen in front of them at part of the day. Whether it be mom's phone when they wake up, or whether it be a tablet, or even just long periods of television watching, that certainly has an implication for our youngest learners today. And I believe that when young children don't have those brain experiences, and I call it brain and body experiences because God created our brains and bodies to work together and move and develop in wonderful ways. And so when our bodies and our brains are deprived of certain activities and experiences, that leads to strong development and growth, and things change just a little bit. Jonathan Haidt also talks a bit about the rewiring of children's brains today, and I think that's certainly part of it. As I have my own two kids who are almost 8 and 5.5, we don't use a lot of screens in our home, and when we do, it's with an adult. It's with an adult, so it's part of the interactions that I have with them or my wife has with them, because we don't want that to be a lost part. Again, my position has pretty much stayed the same. I think that children need experiences that help their brains and bodies develop in the way that God has created them. And that starts in the young years. And so for us as parents and educators, we've got a great honor and a great responsibility to help our students. As I've been around the last year and a half, talking a bit about this book with educators, school leaders, and parents, one of the things that people often ask is, well, what do we do then? And that makes sense because we can't just snap our fingers and screens are gone. Screens are with us. And I'll be honest, Rich, I kind of like my phone from time to time, okay? Sure. Because it's easy access for me to do some of my work tasks. When I want to see what the weather forecast is, when I want to see what the sports scores are that I didn't get to watch the game, but I want to know what the scores are or how my team is doing, I can just pick up my phone. Earlier today, I had a Sam's delivery. How great. I didn't have to spend time going to the store, just a few clicks on my phone, and my family has napkins and a few snacks to last us for a couple days, So there's a great benefit to it. So when people say, well, what does that really mean? And how do we change that? I start thinking of Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers and his television show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, has been around for a while. It's not being recorded live now because Fred has been gone for a couple of years. But the work that Fred Rogers did, especially in his early years, I strongly believe is valid for us today. And we almost need to bring that back to our lives, our classrooms, and our homes.
And again, I think it's a great use of something that's very familiar, especially for a lot of folks in, I'll say, my generation, because I know I got you by a few years, Drew. But again, if you're an adult and you're an educator, our generations we're familiar with Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was something that we grew up upon. Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers were, get home from school in the afternoon, and at least on my PBS station, Sesame Street was on at 4 o'clock, and Mr. Rogers came on right after. So again, we would watch, and Electric Company was in there too.
Yeah, can't forget that one. Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, so these are things that, again, there's a bit of nostalgia to them. So obviously they're going to play well in our minds and our memories because we've got that sense of memory. But when you really look at what Fred Rogers was doing and the message he was presenting and how he was presenting it, this is the sort of thing that, I mean, it really stands the test of time because of who he was, or at least his persona on TV, which seems to be genuine. You never really know celebrities and whatnot, but this is somebody who's held up as someone who seems to be, genuinely concerned about the well-being of children and wanting to provide them an educational entertainment option that, you had mentioned earlier, as parents, you and your wife are diligent in, being an active part in the screen lives of your kids.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
I will admit, uh, Fred was keeping an eye on me while my grandma, who lived with us, was getting dinner ready because
Yep.
Dad hadn't come home from work yet, and he picked up Mom on his way home. So that was who I hung out with most afternoons. Was Mr. Rogers. So. But I think they were able to do that because having spent any time watching what he was presenting, they could make an assessment, a judgment that there's not a threat here. There's not an
Yep.
issue or not an incident here. And of course, if I was going to change the channel from PBS, I had three other options. Cable
It
didn't
was
exist in my
limited. You're
world.
right. It was limited.
It didn't exist in my world. So anyway, all that to say, this is a great connection for a lot of reasons. I think it's very, very valid, very valuable, and will help to stick with the minds of educators today as they look to tackle something that I'm sure Fred would have had a very strong opinion about. Uh,
Yep.
so why don't we start with that question as that's concerned? If you had to put yourself in the position of speaking on behalf of Fred Rogers, knowing what you know about Fred Rogers, what would his take be on all of this? I mean, here's a guy who made his career in the media. I was watching him on a rather large screen. It took a minute to warm up before it
Uh-huh.
started broadcast.
Uh-huh.
But again, this is a guy in the media who would be looking at something that may be helpful to his career, but also has an impact on kids. Where do you think he'd stand?
That's a great question, Rich. And I think that he would have many responses to that question. Um, uh, I'm glad that you noted first the nostalgia of Fred Rogers, because as I talk about him, whenever I just say his name or I ask people what they remember about the television show, a warm smile comes to many people's faces. Such fond memories, just like you shared about sitting in your living room after school, watching Sesame Street, watching Mr. Rogers, your grandma's cooking, you're ready for your mom and dad to come back. Yeah, Fred Rogers certainly has a place in the hearts and in the minds of many. Fred Rogers actually did not start his television show because he was excited about television show. Actually, just the opposite. Fred was quite concerned about this new contraption that you could turn on, and people just appeared on the screen. He was concerned about the implications for what television may have on family dynamics. When
Really?
Fred was growing up, I'll give you a little bit of Fred history. Fred actually grew up in a very wealthy home in the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Fred's dad was a significant business owner, owning many mining companies in the area, and so he grew up with some wealthy family members who contributed many things to his life. However, he had some health problems. And so Fred actually found it very difficult to go out and socialize, to make many friends. Fred was probably known amongst his classroom and school as one of the odd students, one of the odd children, because of his social needs and his health needs. And so again, he spent a lot of time at home in his attic, which is where his mom and dad created a special playroom for him. And it was there that he learned to work through some of the difficulties that he was experiencing as a child. Working through emotions again. His parents were very loving parents. He talked about the great love that he has for his mother, for his father, for his grandparents, that also played a significant part in bringing him up in his childhood. But again, his social contacts were very limited because of his health concerns. And so he had to create his own experiences up in his attic. And that's where actually he, as a young child and as a teenager, created many of the puppets that you might remember from Mr. Rogers' Land of Make Believe, the neighborhood of make believe. And so when we think about that component of the show, those were all Fred Rogers creations, and many people might not know that he actually did the voice for many of those puppets. But Fred was also gifted in music, and that's where he went to school. First was to be trained in music. That while he was good at that, it didn't really fill what he felt for his vocation. And so he actually went to seminary and became an ordained Presbyterian minister. A lot of people don't know about that. So there's a lot of faith-filled aspects in every episode of Mr. Rogers, even though he doesn't mention God's name or Jesus' name. As faith-filled Christians, we can probably look and hear and see some of the faith-filled characteristics and components of his show as well. But he entered television because of his musical gifts. He knew that he could do something that he wasn't seeing on television at that time. As more and more families were purchasing television sets and spending time watching what was on television, Fred didn't see any quality. He saw lots of almost circus-like behavior with these live shows where people were throwing pies in each other's faces and screaming and yelling and just not doing anything of high quality. And so Fred had an opportunity through a local PBS station to create something. And it was very low budget, and that continued throughout his career. While we think of Fred's stage and scenery as pretty significant, it was very low budget, things that he often made on his own. So that's really what got Fred into television, was his concern for television. And he knew that he couldn't eliminate that from entering the homes of families. So he took it on as his dream to create something that he knew would be beneficial for children.
Wow.
That's a lot right there, isn't it?
It is. Again, just a lot of things that you may or may not have known about him, about his background and what he was looking to do as he reached out under the circumstances there. And I totally understand where the concern might come from, with the advent of television. We've got this new platform. What do we do with it? I think I'm too young to remember, the advent of television. By the time I was, around, everyone had a TV in their house. Some people even had two TVs in their house.
Wow, real
Yeah,
fancy.
yeah, and so that was never the thing. But I still very vividly remember in the evening watching the television broadcast day come to an end and the national anthem being played over the television before it went to that set of colored bars where it
Yep.
stayed overnight until somebody at some point much early in the morning and I was awake would get on to start talking about the news or whatever was coming
Yep.
on TV. Uh, and so that advent, I think many of us can remember because when television went from a 12-hour a day thing to a 24-hour a day cycle, well, now we've got to double our content. We got to have something to fill the airwaves. And then as cable TV advanced, now we've got more networks. We got to have more content. Sports fans, we joke about, ESPN, the Ocho, with all of
Mhm.
their rare and ridiculous, non-sports, as kind of a pun to the fact that ESPN had, 7, 8, 12, 100 different channels. But with all of that came the need for more content. How do we fill the time? How do we keep people engaged during that time? We're old enough to remember when MTV played music. We're old enough to remember when the Weather Channel gave you the weather forecast. And those have all now morphed into different things. And so whenever something is new, there's always that experimentation phase of what is this really going to become and how do we make it most effective? For him to recognize that as being a potential threat or having at least having an implication, threat may be too strong of a word, but having an implication upon the development of children was really that's revolutionary. I mean, that was someone looking at something and really having an insight that most people weren't concerned with. Because yeah, we can throw some guy in a funny costume out there doing funny things and the kids will laugh, and won't that be entertaining? But is it helpful? Is it beneficial?
Mhm.
Fast forward now to smartphones and the content that is there, between websites, which I don't think most people use anymore on smartphones, apps, which
Mhm.
are dominant, games, which are the things that pass for a game or an app that people will pay for and use and just get lost in. you know, you're not a better person for doing it, but there they are, and they're free and they pass time, and we find ourselves doing that. So sitting today in 2025 with cell phones offering the same challenge that Mr. Rogers faced back in the 60s when television was emerging in that way, what similarities do you see, and how do we approach it in a similar way to what, say, Fred did back then?
Yeah. Fred was always very firm in his beliefs. Fred studied kind of on the side child development and was very interested in research-based practices. Fred really entered television at a great time, and I believe it was God's timing. Fred entered television and started to really explore what it means for children and how he could best support young children at a time where many people across the globe were having an agreement on the importance of quality experiences for children in their youngest years.
Mhm.
So back in the late 50s, that's when Head Start became very significant. That's when researchers were really understanding what does it mean to have strong early childhood education programs, federally funded, state funded, local programs. What does that mean? Kindergarten started to become more and more of a common practice for children. And so again, that timing was really God's timing, where Fred was able to enter in and explore what it meant. Fred, through his conversations with researchers on child development, really thought deeply of what it meant to focus on young children. And I think that's part of the nostalgia component too, when people think of Fred. If I were to ask a random person that I met on the street to explain Fred in 5 words, some of the common words that would probably pop up would be kind, caring. People would probably talk about his sweater, his signature cardigan sweater, which, fun fact for you, Rich, each one of those sweaters that Fred wore were made by his mother and given to him as a Christmas gift throughout the years.
Wow.
They were not purchased at the department store. They were all made for him by his mother throughout the years. And that was a very significant thing. So those are the cardigan sweaters that Fred wore. But whenever Fred was on television, children, whoever was viewing, and adults too. And so I want to talk sometime today, Rich, about the value that Fred Rogers has, not just for children today, but for us as adults today too. That's something else I want to share because I think there's a lot of great value in that. But whoever the viewer was, they felt cared for during that short period of time, whether they were sitting on the floor or on the couch or in a chair. They felt that Fred knew who they were. They felt that Fred was really talking just to them. So through Fred's eye contact, through his slow speech, his speech patterns, the questioning strategies that he provided, gave children an opportunity to fully engage and to almost feel like he was right there in the living room with them and to participate in the conversation. Fred wanted that. He didn't want television to be something just very, very passive. You talked about at the beginning, you remember coming home and watching Sesame Street and then Fred Rogers. So I've learned a little bit about PBS throughout the last couple of years as well too, through my readings of different books about Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers wanted to make sure that whatever PBS station showed his program, he wanted to make sure that it showed after Sesame Street. Okay. And he did that for a reason, because Sesame Street had a bit more of a peppy routine. Okay. And
Sure.
yes, there was a little bit more entertainment. Sesame Street was also typically 60 minutes long. His show was only about 30 minutes long. And so Fred knew that children would get pepped up and excited. And there was that entertainment factor that kept the mind going. Their segments on Sesame Street were really quite short, okay? Yeah. And so when Big Bird and Snuffleupagus came, they only talked for a couple minutes, and then they went and they did, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and they would go on. But those segments would be quite quick. And Fred wanted children's minds and brains to have opportunities to grow in self-regulation and to expand in what they were able to take in. So Fred's slower pace, more of a deeper dive into a deep conversation is what he wanted. Speaking of Sesame Street, I want to share, I wasn't always a fan of Mr. Rogers. And when I say that, people kind of like, Drew, like from your first year of teaching, we thought that you were just like Mr. Rogers. Well, I take that as a compliment. But in my younger years, I did watch Fred Rogers, but I probably had a preference to Sesame Street because of the entertainment factor. When I was a young teacher, that's when the Arthur TV show had been pretty popular on PBS, and some of the other shows. So I knew about PBS. And Fred Rogers was still doing his programming when I came out of the university and started my teaching career. And again, I knew about him and I watched him, but I thought that the fun aspect, the entertainment aspect of Sesame Street was probably a little bit more my style. Well, Rich, one day I had the opportunity to speak at a conference. I was just one of those little breakout session presenters. But this was a large, significant early childhood conference. And two of the keynote speakers for that event were Gordon and Maria from Sesame Street. Okay. Do you remember Gordon and Maria?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Street? Okay. And so they were the keynote speakers. And here I am, this little lonely guy from a little Lutheran school in Missouri, just doing a couple breakout sessions. I thought I was pretty cool. I got to see Gordon and Maria up on the big stage. Well, the next day, anyone who was a speaker was invited to a special luncheon. And there were no assigned seats, which I thought was pretty amazing. So you could go and sit wherever you wanted. But again, it was a speaker or a luncheon just for those who were speaking and presenting. And I'm looking around. I don't know many people at this conference. And there's an open spot at Gordon and Maria's table. So I am brave and I go and I ask if it's available. And Maria said, come and join us. So I got to sit down right next to Maria from Sesame Street, and we had some nice, friendly conversation. There were a few more people at the table, and Gordon and Maria were mostly talking with them. But I remember Maria looked at me, and her real name is Sonia, but everyone will always call her Maria because that's her Sesame Street name. But Sonia looked at me and she said, tell me, what interests you? And I had talked about my love for Sesame Street and how I had watched her and Gordon throughout the years. And then I talked about my role as a new teacher, as a young teacher teaching kindergarten. And she said, Drew, I'm glad that you really love Sesame Street. But if you are looking at how to best support your students today, you might want to take a deeper look at Mr. Rogers and some of his pedagogy, some of his practices. Sesame Street is good, but Fred had some really deep thoughts on how to best support children and adults. And that was probably the moment that that little light bulb came on, and I started to do that deeper dive on who is Fred Rogers and what does he believe.
So we'll get more into it after the break here, but just in terms of a general sort of thing, you think back to Mr. Rogers in the show and it's set up again. I totally see and understand the deeper dive versus the quick hitters that Sesame Street and Electric Company we're doing, and can in some ways agree with you in terms of that was a little bit more it was cooler in some ways because again it was funnier or whatever, Bert and Ernie doing Bert and Ernie things, Oscar was always great, all those characters. Where Mr. Rogers was more of a one-man show, had a couple of recurring characters, but by and large, it was 30 minutes of him doing and saying what he wanted to share in all of that. So when I think back to, again, Fred Rogers and the connections that he was making there, where the characters from Sesame Street, obviously most of them are puppets. So there's already a sense of, all right, this is cool. Big Bird is cool, but Big Bird's not real. And Oscar and Grover, and I can go on and name all of them. Uh, there's a sense of, yeah, these are puppets. They're not real. They're not real people. But there's real people interacting with the puppets, which is also not real because people don't talk to puppets. And now to, be told that Maria is not even Maria, it's Sonia, adds to that level of this is not real. It's well intended. It's got decent pedagogical value. I mean, you're learning numbers and letters through song and repetition. I mean, things that make sense. But the realism that Mr. Rogers provided in his show is unmatched. You know, he would talk with kids, and again, from my recollection of this, uh, yeah, he would talk slower. He would talk very intentionally, very deliberate when he wanted to show something. But he didn't talk down to you like you were a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. He was trying to explain it in a way that made sense and that you could follow and gives you time as a young child to process what was being shared. You know, the trips that he would take to different places in town to
Yeah.
go see something and
Yeah.
show and share. Again, this is all very real. It's steeped in reality, but it was presented in a way that gave you as a child viewer the opportunity to follow it and understand it on a level without having that same feeling like I'm being talked down to, which to this day still, if I see if I see someone presenting to younger kids and that's the way that they're talking, is that just it kind of, it grinds my gears, I guess I'll use the phrase.
Sure.
Because you don't have to talk to them like they're simple. You just have to talk to them like they're real, and help them where they're at without talking down and using sing song and making it feel like they're less than. And that was something that he never did. So we're gonna jump in after the break here with the point that you had made earlier, wanting to talk about the value for kids and adults. We'll start with kids, and really kind of focusing on that, and then circle back around for adults because I'm actually very curious for Maria to say to you, take another look at Mr. Rogers because there's value there. I'm curious to find out what she meant by that, and then to obviously find out what value you found there that might be applicable to the teachers listening to
Yeah.
this podcast that they can also take into their classrooms as
Yeah.
they continue this craft. So
I'm excited for it.
that's where we're heading. But first, we're going to take this quick break. You're listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear today, please consider sharing our podcast with friends and colleagues in the industry. Again, thank you for listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast.
And welcome back to the Lutheran Education Podcast brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries. We are continuing our conversation with Dr. Drew Gerdes from Concordia, Nebraska, talking about Fred Rogers today and Mr. Rogers' neighborhood and the continuing impact that his work is having within our schools and within our society today. So Drew, let me kind of pick up where I said that I was going to pick up at that before we went to the break here. You wanted to talk about the value that Fred Rogers continues to bring to the lives of kids and then also to adults. So
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
uh, let's start with the kids and touch on what value points you see there, and then after we've hit that for a couple minutes, we'll circle around to what us uh, what us old timers can still get out of
Sure.
listening and learning from Mr. Rogers. So,
Yeah.
what do you think with the kids?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I want to share, Rich, is through my work, learning more about Fred Rogers and his pedagogy and practices, a phrase that consistently comes to mind is less is more. Less is more. And I think in education today, that rings a bell in the ears of teachers in a good way, because I know teachers have so many responsibilities that are on their plate today. They're caring for children, they're educating children, they have school tasks. There are so many things that are on their plate. And when we think about Fred Rogers and Fred Rogers' Neighborhood, his television show, it was very simple, yet very, very meaningful. And so he was he was very, very deep. He did a few things very, very deeply, and he did them well, rather than so many things, but at a shallow level, and he didn't do them well. One of the things that he was really intentional about is his speech. And we talked about this in the first session, where no matter who Fred was speaking to, that person felt very cared for, that Fred was giving all of his attention to them. Children were drawn into Fred's television show because of the way that he spoke. He spoke an average of 124 words per minute, which child development experts believe is the perfect amount of speech for children 8 and under to be able to hear and fully process and understand and be able to respond. And so his 124 words per minute allowed children to actually hear and process and be able to think back in their mind or even verbalize responses at a much higher level than what regular adults speak at. And so that's something I have to remember as a teacher, that I probably speak too quickly, especially when I'm working with young children. So I think about that as a dad when I'm speaking with my children, or when I'm giving instructions. Sometimes I give out so many, 12 steps. Well, they can probably only focus on 2 or 3 of the steps in that process. So how do I best communicate with my children? So that's something that was important. And then you also had talked about puppets. Fred Rogers was very intentional in his television show of differentiating between the real world and the land of make-believe. So that's why his living room set is designed as a real life home that you could live in. And then when the trolley came, ding, 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 ding. Do you remember the trolley? He would sit on that little bench. That's another thing many people remember. He would go and sit on that bench, and he had that little button. And I always wanted one of those buttons in my house, that you could just toggle back and forth. For some reason, I thought that was pretty awesome. And then that trolley would come, and Fred would speak about something. And Fred patterned his television show that he would have some type of a topic that he would discuss and share in the living room, in the setting of that home. And then the same topic would be introduced again when the trolley went into the land of the neighborhood of make-believe, but it was discussed on that level again with adults, but with puppets, and between adults and the puppets. And so it gave another opportunity for children to learn and process. And it was oftentimes discussed or presented in a way that was a little bit more childish, because that's who Fred was working with. And so the intentionality of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood of Make-Believe was so purposeful to make sure that children could process emotions, process things that were happening in their lives or around the world today. Fred, as simple as Fred appeared to be, he was also he was a leader in television in some ways, because he talked about things on the show that no one ever else talked about in children's television. He talked about divorce, but he talked about it in a very developmentally appropriate way that children could understand. When JFK was assassinated, he talked about that on the show. He talked about in the land of make-believe that these are things happen, and it was presented in a way that children could understand. I also think back to when Officer Clemens came to visit Fred, and in the late 60s, during that time of significant social unrest, he presented that in a way that was so appropriate. Fred's in the backyard. He's putting his feet and cooling his feet in the swimming pool. Officer Clemens comes by, and Fred says, "Hey, come on in." Well, Officer Clemens says, "I can't. I don't have a towel." And Fred says, "Don't worry. I have a towel that I'll share with you." And so 2 amazing things that Fred Rogers invites Officer Clemens, an African-American, to come into the pool and put their feet together and share the same towel to dry off their feet. Now, for young children, that makes sense. Totally makes sense, but it made a big statement to the adults as well. And I think that's where Fred, we don't often always see the significant work that Fred did for adults. But I've been able to dive into that really deeply the last number of years, Rich, through some of my engagements with the Fred Rogers Institute at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which is where Fred went. They offer many great free resources for educators through free webinars and things that are available. So I encourage teachers to go and look at the Fred Rogers Institute for some resources that are, again, available for free. But through that, I was able to really dive in and learn, what does it mean for kids and what does it mean for adults? And a little snippet, I've done some of my teacher faculty meetings when I was school administrator, where we would just watch an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and we'd learn about what we saw, we'd discuss it, and we would think, what are the implications for us as we work with young children? What are the implications for how we can replicate some of Fred's practices in our classroom? And what are the takeaways for us as adults?
Excellent. One of the things that comes to my mind as you were talking about, the intentionality of the way Mr. Rogers would speak, the 124 words per minute, which is just fascinating that's the number and that's the range where he was kept at. I don't think, I don't think we often value that, especially society, within educational circles, if there's more research done and decisions being made based on that, then it makes some sense. But I was thinking about, you remember the Robin Williams film, Mrs. Doubtfire?
Oh, I remember. I still laugh at that movie when I watch it. I just laugh and laugh and laugh.
Great movie, but there was one part where it kind of struck me as we were talking about this. The at the end of the movie, when all was well and happy, Robin Williams' character landed a job at a local television station, and it was as the Mrs. Doubtfire character talking with puppets and doing this kids show, because we can teach the premise was we can teach the kids and not bore them to tears. And the example that they used as the guy who was boring the kids to tears was very much steeped in a Mr. Rogers look and a really dry Bill Nye the Science Guy sort of a show. But they really made that character out to be old and useless, maybe, time gone by. He was one of the dinosaurs that he was playing with on screen. And they used that to good effect to make the joke of it. But what that kind of spoke to, I thought, was that's how society kind of views that when it comes to kids.
Yeah.
If we're entertaining them, if they're laughing, if they're giggling, if the screen device, the app on the phone or the tablet has enough funny characters and games, and if slime falls from the sky or those sorts of things, well, then that's good because that's what kids want. Well, it kind of downplays the significant role that someone like Fred Rogers would have played in this case, because no, he didn't have slime falling, and no, he didn't have recurring characters come running on and throwing confetti, and no one was drinking from the fire hose or whatever the case may be. But it was solid, it was real, and it was connected to where the kids were at in that respect, that it was what they needed. And again, at a level where they were able to get all the things that you've said there. And the other thing that kind of struck me in that sort of a sense too is I think of the end of the show and the song that he would sing at the end of each broadcast. And there was the one line toward the end of it, and I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you.
Yeah.
So it already in that sense created up. Look, this is an interactive thing, not in the sense that you can go to our app and play along virtually, but and then in the next slide, and you'll have things you want to talk about.
Yes.
I will too. Well, me sitting in my living room in Saginaw, Michigan, never had a chance to talk to Fred Rogers about what I wanted to talk about. But just planting the seed and the idea that I'll have things I want to talk about. Yeah, I do. Maybe there was something in the show that I wanted to
Mhm.
talk about. Well, who am I going to go talk to this about? Well, I've got a sister sitting right here watching the show with me. I got a grandma in the kitchen. Mom and dad are coming. It was an invitation to take what I had just learned and talk about it and connect and make
Yep.
that human impact. And in a world of the anxious generation, we're missing that key component so badly.
Yep.
And that was something that was just a natural part of every episode of what Mr. Rogers was presenting, and very intentional to give the child who was watching it that opportunity to say, yeah, go and do, go talk about this,
Hmm.
learn more about this, discuss what you saw, what you heard, what you think, much, way ahead of his time in terms of all those things. And even now, 50, 60, 70 years later, we still have folks on television trying to produce kids television, and they haven't figured that simple thing out. Less is more.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, number one, I want to compliment you for recalling those words to Fred's closing song. And you're right, it was strategic. It was strategic of look for someone to talk to. And it was Fred's way of saying, I'll see you tomorrow. It was his hook to make sure that they would come back tomorrow. Because Fred had many ideas. Some of my favorite episodes from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was his visit to the Crayola Crayon Factory. I loved watching that. As a little farm boy in Minnesota, I would never, ever get to see how Crayola crayons were made. But his visit there sparked that interest in me. I also remember when he went to the Red Wagon Factory, and I got to I had that wagon, and now I got to see two guys in the process of putting those wagons together. I also remember the day that he rode on the garbage truck. He wanted to see what happens when you put your trash out at the end of your driveway. And that was fascinating for me as a farm boy to see what happens. And a trash truck, well, I never saw that living on a farm. So that was exciting. And Fred always had those ideas that were very developmentally appropriate, that were connected to children's lives. And it was always connected to learning, Rich. I think that's the big difference between Fred's television programming and many of the programs that we have today that are really just focused on entertainment.
Sure.
And they have sponsors because it's all money. It's money. But Fred was about learning and growing. And those are some of the takeaways that we still have today for kids and for adults. I want to talk about those for a little bit, about Fred's 6 fundamentals of learning and growing. And when these fundamentals are in place for children, again, and adults, it sets us up for success. And in a world where we're so busy and society says you need to do this and you need to do this, and at work, it says you need to produce more, you need to be more efficient. It can be overwhelming. And when we're overwhelmed, we're anxious. Okay. And so even though I think back to the beginning of our talk here today, Jonathan Haidt's book, really designed for the adolescent age, I think I'm part of the anxious generation too, because life just makes me worry and be anxious. Okay. My 5.5-year-old, I know that she carries worries and anxieties. And so it's okay to process that. It's good to talk about those things, just as Fred did in his television episodes. One of the 6 fundamentals of learning and growing is a sense of self-worth. And so when we know that we have great value, we can stand up a little bit taller and approach our day in a different way. And as Christians, we know that God has created us in his image and God loves us. And so God has given us that great sense of self-worth. And because of what Christ has done for us through his death and resurrection, we get to go in and share God's message. And so that to me contributes to our sense of self-worth, that God has created me to go and serve my neighbors. And I believe that's what Fred understood as well. And so his dedication to the television show that cascaded and spewed out into the living rooms of children and families around the country and in Canada, because he lived in Canada and produced his television show there for a number of years. Another one of those fundamentals is the sense of trust. And when we trust other people, we can do more. Okay. So Rich, I've known you a little bit for a few years, and so I trust you. And so when you reach out to me and ask about having a conversation on a podcast, I know it's going to be a good experience because I have a level of trust with you. The same happens for our children. When they trust caring adults, they're going to do things in a different way.
Sure.
Another thing is curiosity. I think in our world today, we've almost choked curiosity out of our lives. And it's good to be curious. That's one of Fred's songs. It's good to be curious because from curiosity, that's where learning comes. In our classrooms today, the curious children are oftentimes sadly noted as the problem children, because those are the kids who touch everything. Okay. Whether you're in the hallway or in the classroom, because they're curious. And they want to touch and they want to look and they want to see. And those are the kids who probably interrupt as well because they have things to say or they've got questions. But that's a fundamental of learning and growing, to be curious. When I'm curious about something, it's that inner drive to go and explore it even more. Another fundamental is the capacity to look and listen. And in our world today, I think that isn't there. And that's where the anxiety creeps in, the worries creep in. It's good to look and listen, okay? It's good for me to sit and watch other people and listen to them. I don't have to always respond. I don't always have to interrupt with my thoughts or feelings, okay? And I think our whole world, so this is where all of these things are for children, but they are just as equally valid for adults as well. It's okay to look and just listen. We don't have to respond. We don't have to be the winner of the conversation. Another thing is the capacity to play. And in our world today where for adults, I'm going to talk about adults first, we as adults need to play, okay? And so whether that be baking or sports or reading books or gardening, whatever it is, that capacity to play helps us learn, helps us grow, but it helps us with our mental health as well. And research continues to share that that's how children learn best, through hands-on play that invites learning. Regarding the anxious generation, we need to work to help to support our youngest learners in growing in self-regulation. And research continues to say that children grow in self-regulation by playing with others. And so the capacity to play is significant. The last fundamental of learning and growing, again, it's almost extinct, but it's called times of solitude. And children and adults need those times of solitude. In the world that says you need to produce more, you need to do more, you need to just run yourself ragged, again, that's where I put my hands up and I say, less is more. It doesn't mean I'm being lazy. That doesn't mean I'm neglecting my work. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means finding times in your day where you can just have a moment of solitude, okay? And as faith-based Christian people, that's a Bible study. That's a Bible devotion. That's just time praying to God. That's singing a song, whatever that means, because our bodies and our brains need that rest. And in our world, there are so many things coming at us that our brains need time to process. And for children, if they're continually doing one thing after another and they don't have time to process, are they learning and growing? So as an early childhood teacher, rest time or nap time was a significant part of my day when I was a preschool teacher, okay? Yes, it was nice for me to just have that moment of solitude, but it was good for kids. And even if they didn't sleep, their minds were still processing all of the things that we did before that rest time started. So just to, again, run down: sense of self-worth, sense of trust, curiosity, capacity to look and listen, capacity to play, and times of solitude. When we have those incorporated into who we are, it helps us be better learners and it helps us grow, children and adults, and maybe lessen some of that anxiety that puts on our shoulders.
We're talking with Dr. Drew Gerdes on the podcast. Phenomenal, just great stuff that Fred put out in there. And Again, after you had mentioned, not needing to have to jump in with a response, now I'm a little nervous because I don't have to, but I kind of have to in that respect. But all those points that he makes are so valid, and we see them in so many ways and can experience them, and some of those things that we convince ourselves that we should be doing or ought to be doing. Sometimes it's just us trying to keep up appearances or trying to, maintain our place in what we think is an important part of society. And frankly, sometimes it's just a flat out lie that Satan's trying to plant into us to make sure that we're too tired and too burned out and too frustrated and too whatever other emotion that we're feeling, as a way of separating us from some very basic premises. And again, you can see the theological that comes through there, despite the fact that he was not saying it from a position of this is a Christian worldview. But you can see it's there, it's rooted in that,
Yep,
and
exactly.
could very easily make the scriptural connections to each of those six. So for you then, Drew, what are the key takeaways that you would want us to gain from all of this? What have you figured out from all of this that, if we were going to take away, apply, consider in our own lives, what would those be?
Oh, great question. And I'm glad you asked because in my work, learning more about Fred and talking with other people who have been as interested and passionate in Fred Rogers as I have, there's four key learnings that I've really kind of developed over the years, as I've dove into this. The first one is to we have to celebrate our differences, okay? And today, sometimes that kind of people are a little uneasy about that because God made all of us different. Okay. I think about a song that one of my good friends wrote a number of years. I am unique. I'm like nobody else. God made each of us very special. I am myself. I am who I am. You are who you are because God made you. Okay. And God loves us so much. So one of the things I say, my first key learning is foster diversity, inclusion, and belonging by celebrating our differences. Okay. And I think that's important for our youngest learners that they don't see all the differences. Okay. And so I appreciate that in the young years is that our youngest learners don't see that someone looks different than who they are. They want to play with one another. And so building that community aspect is so important. I think that's one key learning. Another one is to promote curiosity about the lived experiences of others. We all have different experiences that come into shaping who we are. And Fred Rogers highlighted that well. There's Handyman Sam, there's Officer McFeely, all of those people that he talked to about the ideas. I have more ideas for you. I want to help you learn about this. And Fred valued every one of those people on the television show. I still remember watching and I would hear the knock on the door. And Fred would stop whatever he was doing and he would always ask, who do you think that could be? I wonder who that could be. And in my mind, I'm feeling pretty smart at the moment because I know it's Mr. McFeely because whenever that door knock on the door comes at that part of the episode, it's always Mr. McFeely. But Fred wants us as the viewer to feel pretty smart about it. So he asked the question, I wonder who that could be. Who do you think it is? And Fred comes and there's always some experience, or again, Handyman Sam or some other visitor. And Fred stops whatever he does because he wants to learn from others. I think about when Fred learned how to play the cello by visiting with Yo-Yo Ma, or there's an episode where Fred has a young child come in and does breakdancing. Fred Rogers breakdancing. You don't think many people don't put those words in the same sentence, but Fred wanted to see what this child could teach him. And so again, promote curiosity by promoting the lived experiences of others. Another key learning, number 3, is to build a culture that nurtures us to be lifelong learners, because God has wired our brains to continually learn from the faith-filled aspect. we want to continue to learn about his love. Even though it's a very simple concept, Jesus died on the cross and rose again because God loves us so much. We want to continue to grow in that. And so from the curiosity and to be lifelong learners, and I think teachers can connect with that really well because we never know it all. We always want to be lifelong learners. And I think the last one is really significant too. We have to understand and accept that learning, innovation, and creativity all include making mistakes. And I think maybe from the business world, that's understood because, you hear stories of Apple Computer and all the mistakes that they made. And then you hear about all these big companies and Fred Walton and all the mistakes that he made. But you have to try, you have to be a risk taker, and learn from those mistakes. And that's where your innovation and your creativity can come into play. And in a world that says you have to do everything perfectly the first time, that makes me sad because I'm on this side of heaven. I'm not going to do anything perfect ever, but I want to learn from it. And so I think that those four key learnings for me have been pretty significant, not just as a teacher, but also for me as an adult.
Yeah. And again, remembering back to the show, when Fred would be doing those different activities and going out and experiencing those different things, many times, if it was appropriate, he would take a hand at trying to do that or would participate.
Mhm.
And sometimes he did so, and it turned out pretty well. And sometimes he did so, and you could tell that this was just not his gift. I mean, he didn't do it, and it didn't turn out that great.
But he tried
And
it.
but he tried it, and he was okay with either outcome.
Yep.
There was
Mhm.
never a level of embarrassment if he tried it. He just accepted the fact, hey, this is not as easy as it looks, and what you're doing here is really, really outstanding. And if it came out pretty good, then he would say, wow, this is great. Thank you for showing me that. But the fact that he was experiencing it, he
Mhm.
was learning about it, that was the key piece. And again, the mistake or the failure to immediately grasp it, that wasn't the issue, that wasn't the problem. So many of those things that you've shared there, the celebrating differences and the curiosity and being alive, all of those things, one thing I see that they have in common is that they are interpersonal.
Mm.
They are most possible when two or more people are connected together to do these sorts of things and to
Yeah.
share in that experience. And
Yep.
that more than anything else stands in direct opposition to what we see so often nowadays. It's got to be efficient. It's got to
Mhm.
be streamlined. It's got to be quick and easy, and if it's not, then it's bad. The the longer meetings, the getting together face to face, it's bad. I mean, we again are doing this podcast. We broadcast these or record these through Zoom. So my producer Dave is on one side of Detroit. I'm on the other side of Detroit. You're in Nebraska.
Yeah.
So the technology is great that we could do this because otherwise folks are getting in cars or planes and trying to make this work, and that's just not as easy. But the value here isn't the technology. The value here is the conversation.
Yeah. Yep.
Value here is the interpersonal. And we
Mhm.
miss that in the never-ending need for one more gigabyte,
Yep.
one more level of high def, one more whatever the goal is on the tech side of things.
Mhm.
It's the connection where that all takes place. And
Yep.
there's a kid this weekend who's going to experience building something or making something with a grandma or a grandpa who they've been doing this for years and they want to share that innovation. And that's great to get that experience, to draw that intergenerational sort of thing. And even if grandma or grandpa have to hop onto their phone and look at a Google video to figure out how to do it, well, that's fine. Because in that case, you're just looking at what somebody else, put out there as far as getting that help or that assistance, to do something maybe you're not as confident in. Guarantee you what the child's going to walk away from that experience is not grandpa had to Google this.
Yep. It's
Grandma
grandpa
had to
did it
look
with
up
me.
grandma had to watch a YouTube video. That's not what they're going to take from it. They are going to remember the time spent with someone who loves them and cared
Yep.
enough to be able to pour into them their time, their passions, their knowledge, and make them a better person that because they care about them.
Yep. And I
That's
think that's
that's the
exactly what
point.
Fred Rogers wanted. He knew he couldn't be in the living rooms of every child, but here's the next best thing.
Mhm. Drew, this is phenomenal. Absolutely love this. You promised me though we were going to end with a bang.
Oh yeah.
So
So
before we do,
okay.
I just want to make this connection too. If someone wants to reach out, connect with you more, learn
Oh,
more,
please
say about
do.
the Fred Rogers Institute, or maybe even talk to you about sharing some of these experiences with their faculty or staff and a PD, or how should they get a hold of you? What's the best way to get in
Oh,
touch?
yeah, great. My email, drew.gerdes, Gerdes, at cune.edu. You could probably also just Google me and you'll probably find my email address. That's one of the joys of technology today. But drew.gerdes at cune.edu. I love to hear what people have for ideas regarding their practice with Fred Rogers and his pedagogy in the classroom. I'm happy to share more information at any time. Again, I want Fred to continue to be with us because what he brought to the field of education, what he brought into the lives of young children is really significant. Rich, just a couple weeks ago at the LEA convocation in St. Louis, I did a workshop on Fred Rogers, and I think just over 1,000 people came to that session. And so we know that people are eager to hear about Fred. Again, there's some nostalgia that's a big part of it. It puts a smile on our face. It makes us warm and fuzzy because we have good memories. And we want to take those memories and make sure that they're put into practice even yet today for kids and adults.
All right, excellent. Thank you again. And again, if you've got more information you want to connect with Drew on, please go ahead and do so. But all right, big finish here.
All right. Are
Trivia
you
time. What
ready?
do you
Are
got
you
for us?
ready? Okay, so write
I
this down.
I'm
Write this
ready.
down.
And
I'm
and
gonna.
I'm gonna do this. My phone is here. It's off, as you can see. I'm not searching the answers.
So I'm going to give you some facts because many Lutheran schools, many schools or churches do trivia nights. Okay, and you are becoming an expert in Fred Rogers, and so I'm going to give you a couple Fred facts that could show up on a trivia night Fred Rogers category. Okay, the first
Excellent.
one, McFeely. We know of Mr. McFeely, right? The mailman. Okay, McFeely is actually his mother's maiden name. Yeah,
Wow. So
Fred,
mother's maiden
Fred's
name.
mother's maiden name, McFeely, and he used that name in the show because of his strong connection and relationship with his mom and his maternal grandparents. So McFeely. Here's another
Excellent.
one, a number 143, 143.
Okay.
It's something I won't probably see anytime in the near future, but that was Fred Rogers' desired constant weight, 143 pounds. He worked hard to always maintain a weight of 143 pounds. He liked that number because it represented the words, I love you. Because I has one letter, love has four letters, and you has three letters. And that's a
Wow.
message that really resonated with him. And so he was a swimmer every day. He would get up early and he would go to the pool and exercise in the swimming pool. He wanted to maintain that weight of 143 pounds. I mentioned it early, 124 is Fred's words per minute for speech. That's a significant number. I keep practicing that. I speak kind of quick when I'm excited about things, but when I'm with children, I really work hard to get down to that rate. The last one is 895. Fred Rogers made 895 episode of Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. 895 episodes. That includes some of the early local shows all the way up through his syndication. 895.
That's amazing when you think about it, because to have that many topics to be able to talk about and to be able to maintain, that's again, from as we mentioned earlier, it's hard to fill content.
Uh-huh.
Nearly 900 episodes. That's astonishing. But
Yeah.
but
And
definitely also
remember,
a testimony to his timelessness.
yes, and his dedication. And remember, he did the music. So whenever you hear the piano playing, that's usually him. He did the voiceover for a good majority of the puppets. All of the puppets he made, a lot of the puppets like Daniel Tiger, Lady Elaine Fairchild, those were puppets that he made as a young child too. And so if anyone ever has a chance to go to the Fred Rogers Institute, or there's a number of other museums around the country that have some Fred Rogers artifacts, they're fascinating to go and look at and visit.
I was going to ask if the Institute had any sort of like a museum or a display of
Yep, they've got some of his
some
many
of
of
the
his
artifacts.
puppets, some of his cardigan sweaters, some of his tennis shoes are all located there.
Excellent. Drew, can't thank you enough. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing this passion and just being able to not only just give everybody a nice trip down memory lane, but to be able to spark conversation and to be able to then drive that into what we're doing as educators. Again, thank you for your interest and your passion for this and your willingness to share it with us and the listeners.
Indeed. Thanks for having me. God's blessings to everyone. And I
And
encourage everyone to explore more about what Fred said.
Drew, blessings on your ministry. And for those of you who are listening, again, blessings on yours as well. Be sure to like and share the link here, share the information with others to let them have a chance to get to know a little bit more about Mr. Rogers and to be able to utilize some of the great examples that he gave to us in your classrooms as well. Thank you for your time and for listening. We are happy to be able to present this podcast to you. So on behalf of everyone at LSEM, thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries.
Thank you for listening. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks for the Lutheran Education Podcast. For more information about LSEM, go to our website at luthsped.org. You can follow us on X by going to www.x.com/LSEM1873 or on Facebook at facebook.com/LSEM1873. If you're on Instagram, you can find us by going to @LSEM1873. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks for the Lutheran Education Podcast. Did you enjoy today's podcast? Want to help get the word out? Please leave us a review on the app you're using to listen today.